Praise God, I am Sister Martina, and today we are going to talk about Pope Pius the 11th, who governed the Church for 17 years between 1922 and 39. His was one of the most complex pontificates of the last centuries because he got the Church at the end of the First World War. Europe was devastated because of the war. Not only socially, but also politically, economically. In the United States, of course, we had the Great Depression from 1929 on, which affected the whole Western world. In Africa and Asia, we had still the colonial times with all its injustice and problems. And of course, when people live in such difficult, terribly difficult times with such poorness, such lack of perspectives, the easy answer for that is always to go to the extremes. And so this is the time exactly when the very radical political ideologies of the 20th century either appeared or grew up. Communism existed already in Mexico and then, of course, in Russia, but it grew exactly in this time of Pius IX. And, of course, fascism in Italy, Spain, and Nazism in Germany. So the work of the Pope, on one side, to defend the Church, to maintain the independence of the Church, and on the other side to instruct, to guide not only the Catholics, but more or less all people of goodwill, all Christians, was an enormously complicated work. Pius XI was also an Italian. He was the son of what we today would call a middle-class family. He was a very brilliant student, had 3 doctorate titles. But he was himself a very modest person, a very non-charismatic person. His whole life was a life of intense and unbelievably hard work. What he did in his 17 years makes tired even to tell about it, and this is not the case here, of course. Among his actions, perhaps one of the most important was the organization of the so-called Catholic Action, a lay movement that was very important in countries like Italy and other countries too, and in which the lay people, guided by the Church, made, of course, impact and had influence in all new groups in society. So there is a Catholic Action for young people, for intellectuals, for workers, and so on, in a peaceful and constructive way. And of course, and the leitmotif of the Pope was exactly this expression, Christ the King. He was the one to create the Feast of Christ the King that we have until today at the end of the liturgical year, because his main idea was we need to affirm and to remember that Christ is the King of everything, of the universe. Not only of heaven, but also of politics, economics, and social life, intellectual life, and so on. Not in the sense that the Church should govern everything and know everything and should somehow govern us as like a dictatorship. Much on the contrary. What he says is when each person individually, freely recognizes Christ as the King, then as a consequence, society, politics, economics will be better. And inasmuch we don't recognize that, we try to make a society, to build a society without God, the more inhuman, the more barbaric this society will be. There can only be humanity when recognize God. That's what he says. And as it happens with the Pope, with the popes, contrary to the politicians so many times, they don't contradict, of course, the popes that came before them. I mean, they make many different things in terms of organization, laws, and so on. but not theological, of course, theologically. And what Pope Pius the 11th says is more or less the same as the popes before him. Every time we get God out of our lives, the thing is that we ourselves are destroying ourselves. I mean, we are destroying society, we are destroying peace, we are destroying happiness, and so on. And in this sense, he wrote two very important encyclicals, but also many other documents, exactly as a thief, very clear, very pastoral, but highly philosophical condemnation of the two great totalitarian ideologies of his time, communism and fascism, Nazism. And the encyclicals are quite impressive to read today, because many of these things still happen today in our world, although in another form. And what he says is that we tend to think that the extreme right and the extreme left are opposite, but they are not, he says. They are opposite just in some superficial aspects. Actually, the problem with both of them is that they deny God, and by denying God, they deny individual human liberty and responsibility. It's not anymore the person who builds the society, but the state. The state becomes the new God, and of course such a state has to be a dictator, has to be violent, because otherwise people won't obey to it, and has to see people as numbers, as machines, not anymore as free and worthy human beings. And he says very clearly, if we go on in the way of these ideologies, the world will sink into a barbarism and a violence that we did not know yet in history, because of course the modern technology allows this barbarism to be immensely bigger than before. And he says, actually both the Nazi and the communists who shout their slogans, one of them for race, the other for class, they are both very near each other. And we see this in history, because some of the people who ended up being a Nazi or a communist, they began on the other side of the spectrum exactly. And he says the only remedy for this is exactly to remember over and over again who we are. Where do we come from? What is the purpose of life? And that means God, that means Christ. If we forget that, we are killing ourselves, we are killing our own society. And he was also very active, very pragmatic, so to say. So one of the things that he tried to do was, of course, treaties, so that he could maintain the independence of the church, and with that, the independence of all that the church does, including social help and work. And so he made a treaty with Mussolini's government in Italy, the Lateran Treaty, by which the Vatican, which exists until today, was created. And with Germany, he made also the Concordat, trying to maintain the church's independence. And this is sometimes today quoted as if being that the Pope somehow supported this rightist regimes, and it's exactly the opposite. And one just needs to read the text to see that he's saying exactly the danger is so immense. We should try to preserve what we still can preserve. And he died just before Second World War. Of course, seeing that what he said was becoming reality. And but his message is so important for us until today, because we still live politically amazingly. We repeat our own mistakes in spite of everything that we have suffered, between right and left. And what he says is the true Christian cannot be a man of the right, neither a man of the right nor a man of the left. There is no left or right for the Christian. What we follow is not a human ideology. What we follow is God, who speaks through our individual and free conscience. And so, of course, we can make our parties, political parties, we should group ourselves in society, but never under an ideology. If someone comes and says you have to be a communist or fascist or this or that, the first answer is I don't have to be anything. I have to be a son of God. I have to be free in mind, conscience to follow what I think God wants for me. Yes, also in politics, also in economics, also in science, and so on. And this is so important for us until today. I mean, not to let ourselves be dominated by propaganda, by ideologies, by radicalisms in politics, extremisms and violence and so on, but be free, maintain our mind and our person free to do what we know to be good, to be right, because our conscience tells us so. Till the next time, and God bless you all.